So it seems that the Warhammer 40k 10th edition indexes are finally upon us. The first one's dropped today, the rest are supposedly out within the next week or so. Let's talk about Games Workshop's new rules downloads and what we can find within. Hello and welcome back to Warspecs Tactics, where today we're talking about the new 40k indexes. Now the first one has arrived, I thought it would be interesting to see what sort of general trends are inside these armies, what sort of stuff that we're going to be missing and will come later, and talk through that leaked schedule for the index releases which should be dropping over the next week or so. Basically, the news today is that the first of the Warhammer 40k indexes has dropped for download. It's indexed Tyranids first, apparently. It seems like a pretty fitting choice, to be honest, given that they're pretty much the main antagonists of 10th edition, it would seem. A whole bunch of new models in the Leviathan box, plenty more to come, and maybe a little bit more unique to 10th edition, given that we get Space Marines every edition. So maybe it makes sense to have the Bogs have the first limelight. I'm really looking forward to going through indexed Tyranids in full. Hopefully that video should be out sometime within the day, probably in about 12 hours or so. I thought first before I drill into that though it might make sense to just talk about the indexes in general, as they give us a good pattern for what to expect with the general contents of Warhammer 40k. Games Workshop's certainly given us a whole bunch of previews, but I think it's also pretty useful when you actually see the full contents of one of these drops, as it means that you can actually fully find out what's here and what isn't. The fact that Indexed Tyranids is dropping on this day as well also doubly confirms that leaked release schedule that Games Workshop seems to be following. I guess that means that we should have Space Marines tomorrow, which should be a very, very big one given the amount of units that they have. And I think in general it's just quite nice to have confirmation that this stuff really is happening. It's really quite a big deal for Warhammer 40k in general to have free downloadable faction rules. It's something that Games Workshop just hasn't done in a very long time, bar a few slightly niche or oddball factions. Even when they did the full reset for 8th edition, you had to pick up the rules via those index compilation books. They were still physical rule books and not digital downloads, and you very much had to pay money for them if you wanted to have access to a book that would get superseded by the codex. I think it's really quite a nice positive move for Games Workshop to actually embrace the digital age, and perhaps a particularly smart move given that with 10th edition they're just trying to make every effort to draw in as many new players to the game as they possibly can. Simplified rules and rules that you can access for free without having to go to a third-party website like Warpedia or Battlescribe or something means that people can have a really good look at how the game actually functions, get interested in the way that any one army or faction plays, and maybe think about taking up the hobby from there. I do think it's worth noting as a positive move from Games Workshop, hopefully to encourage them to continue to make similar moves like this in the future. For the actual contents of the downloadable Tyranids Index, it is basically as we expected. No real major surprises here, though it's quite cool to see the formatting and how everything's laid out. For Index Tyranids, we get Army Special Rules. The Tyranids have two different ones called Synapse and Shadow in the Warp. Synapse being the way that their leadership works a bit differently, either being very good or very bad depending on how close you are to their leader organisms, and Shadow in the Warp causing that very scary whole board battle shock, which could be kind of disruptive. From the Space Marine Index cards, it also looks like any other weird army construction things will also be listed here. Space Marines have that rule to do with their chapters and how you can't take, say, Ultramarines alongside Blood Angels or Imperial Fists within the same force. Most units are de-restricted, it's just for unique units and special characters and things. I guess it might also be where we find things like the rules for Allied Demons or Brood Brothers for Genestealer cults, perhaps things like that Super Heavy Walker keyword for the Imperial Knights as well. Then, as promised, we've got a launch detachment as well. The Tyranids get their Invasion Swarm detachment, you get a detachment rule with their adaptive rules, 4 enhancements here and 6 stratagems. It seems like that's the general pattern for these index detachments going forward. I'd guess there's probably going to be quite a lot of parity at launch, though they did say that some of them might have more or less than this, so we might see a little bit more variation than that in terms of numbers within the codexes. Didn't sound like they were necessarily going to be going very far from that though. I'd expect something like 6 to 8 stratagems and maybe 3 to 5 enhancements. I don't think it's going to vary too drastically, even for armies that work a bit differently. Then of course we have the datasheets. They're laid out as a 2-part spread. When we get the actual physical data cards, there's going to be a front and a back to them. The front being the actual rules for the weapons and how you play them in game, the back being more sort of an army construction type page that's going to be useful for building your army. That one lists which weapons the unit can equip, and other things like which units they can attach to with leaders or what units they can transport. Judging by the Tyranids Index, it does look like the datasheets are in a bit of a random order these days. Some of them seem to be loosely clustered together, but we do seem to have certain characters, flyers, and other random things just all mixed in. Maybe not quite as easy to chunk down into different sections compared with when they had force organisation charts, like say fast attack or heavy support. As seemed likely, it does seem that points costs aren't coming with the indexes though. I feel like this is maybe a bit of a shame really. I think that the Games Workshop maybe could have managed something technical to allow points costs to be put on the indexes as well as in their big Minotaur and Field manual they're going to come out with. But I feel like just for the chance of discrepancies and errors, maybe it's best that they keep everything just within one document. It'd be a bit weird if you had discrepancies between the indexes and the Minotaur and Field manual. I think it is just a little bit annoying in the interim that we get to see the units, but we don't actually know how many points they cost. Apparently, they're going to be along fairly soon, and Games Workshop did say that it will be a Minotaur and Field handbook download, so a great big table worth of points. Plus, you'd also have the option of finding them out in the 40k app whenever that drops. Another section that we're waiting for as well are the combat patrol rules as well. They're not listed in this document, and nor are any crusade rules either. Sounds like that's going to be coming as its own individual download, with all the factions together, I'd guess. I guess maybe this isn't the worst idea though, it does seem to be its own separate game mode, and it might be a bit confusing if you had a mix of different combat patrol and regular datasheets with minor variations between the two. In terms of what's coming next, it does seem that this leaked release schedule is accurate that we got a little while back. I believe that this leaked release schedule that's been really quite widely circulated at this point was initially posted by Chapter Master Valrak, often very ahead of the game on the rumours and things, and it's basically a breakdown of when the digital rules are dropping, the first three of which have been accurate, core rules, Leviathan datasheets, and then Tyranid datasheets all on the right days. That kind of implies that the rest of this is really quite likely, plus Games Workshop have soft confirmed a whole bunch of these themselves. They said that the Leviathan factions were coming this week, and that would fit with Space Marines tomorrow, and then they said that the rest of the indexes would be over the next week. Again, that perfectly tallies with this chart. In theory, we get other Space Marine datasheets like Blood Angels and Friends on June the 12th, the Chaos datasheet is dropping the next day, then the other Imperium like Sisters and Guard and Custodes, and then a massive great big Xenos drop on Thursday the 15th. Finally, at the end of the week, apparently we're getting points cost and the GT pack then. I think points are some of the most hotly anticipated things, as then we can actually properly start theory crafting with armies and putting models on the table and knowing that they're at least somewhat balanced. I guess this schedule must have been at least fairly widely circulated, given that Games Workshop sent out their Leviathan boxes and a bunch of rules to a whole bunch of people making videos and content creation for it. People would need a rough schedule as to when they're allowed to post videos on certain topics, so maybe it's not too surprising that it got leaked. In any case, really quite cool to see, so credit to Mr. Valrak for sharing this one. Otherwise, apparently after points, we've got the Combat Patrol and the Boarding Patrol and Crusade rules coming the week after. The Combat Patrols again should be a very, very big content drop, loads of factions coming out at once there, all with their own slightly tweaked stratagems and different rules for that game mode. It will be kind of interesting to see what they make of the Combat Patrols, and apparently some codexes will be getting them updated as their rules drop. I must admit this isn't maybe what I would have guessed they would have done with 10th edition indexes and things initially. Going into 10th edition, I might have guessed that they'd just drop everything all on one day. They often tend to do that with things like balanced data slates and points updates, but maybe a staggered release schedule isn't the worst in the world, given that it's just a crazy amount of information to come out, and for the community to assimilate it bit by bit. It's pretty close to the equivalent of basically redoing codexes for the vast majority of factions in the game all within a week or two, so it is quite a lot of info to come out. I do think that separating out the points is pretty annoying though. For the index downloads, it doesn't sound like they're going to be a permanent thing. They will also have the index data cards that you can also buy separately, which will just be a visual aid with the same information, though if they FAQ any of the PDFs too hard, then the data cards might be a little bit less use. I'm sure they'll be aiming not to in general, but there are some rumours going around that there are going to be some FAQs and erratas to certain factions from day one. Even with their slimmed down rules approach, they've got a lot of crazily powerful rules in the game, and it really would surprise me if there aren't a few overpowered unseen combos so far. Maybe the whole Eldar D-Cannon heavy weapons and fate dice is perhaps one of the biggest. Otherwise, they said that they'll update the PDFs as living documents apparently, a really positive step to just include any FAQs and errata straight there, so you know that they'll get updated, and I guess the same will be for their app. I suppose they'd also have to issue FAQ and errata documents for the index cards though as well, so they'd still be available to track any changes compared with the former. It does sound like the rules aren't going to be staying free forever though. When the codexes come out, they certainly haven't said that there'll still be a free datasheet download option. I feel like they probably would have if they were going to, so that's perhaps a bit unlikely there. Though I'd guess for quite a lot of factions in 10th edition, these index downloads will give you a good year or so of free rules. Looks like there's only 7 codexes announced that are coming out within the year of 10th edition dropping, starting out with Tyranids and Space Marines in autumn, and then Necrons and Admech in winter, with a few more in spring and probably a few more in summer. I guess a lot of factions will be able to use these free downloadable index rules for a while. Anyway though, let me know what you make of the first glance at indexes, the free downloads, their potential schedule, and how long they'll last. Look forward to hearing your thoughts down in the comments. If you've enjoyed the video, then feel free to subscribe to Auspex Tactics, where I'll certainly keep the regular 40k videos coming. Looking forward to digging into index tyrannids later in the day, so feel free to subscribe or check back later if you'd like to see that. Finally, if you have been enjoying all the videos on the channel, I would just like to mention that Auspex Tactics does have a Patreon page as well, and you can find that linked in the video description if you're interested in helping support. Channel patrons do get a fair few advantages, seeing certain videos early, regular votes to see what sort of things happen next on the channel, and automatic entry into the regular prize giveaways with a chance to win some big model kits each month. If any of that sounds good to you, or you'd just like to help support, the link is down in the video description. In any case, a massive thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.